Okay. Well, I'm Agree.
I'm Harrison.
And I'm Samraaj.
And this is Bottom Line Design. We've got Samraaj on today from Ion. And I think there's actually like a lot to get through. So do you want to just start with like an intro of what Ion is, what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Samraaj, and I'm working on a company called Ion Design. We turn your Figma designs into clean React code, and we do that by using AI to help us understand your code base and understand what components you've already built and build code that reuses your existing components and build things within the context. So we use like your current version of React, and we're able to write actually clean code.
So you're someone that definitely knows nothing about design systems.
I know a little bit, but I'm much more heavy on the engineering side, if I'm going to be honest, right? Like design is something I'm super passionate about, but if you were to ask me to go and build a ton of beautiful landing pages and stuff like that, no, I'm not your guy.
And what originally like drew you to that?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
Yeah, that is.
I've never asked you that. Yeah, like how'd you end up there?
So I've kind of worked basically all three positions in this, right? So I was a front-end engineer at Expensify and a couple other companies for a while. And I was also a product manager at Bravado, where I also managed a design team. So kind of the three disciplines that that we sell a product to are design, engineering, and product, aka the entire product team.
Right.
And I've had a function in basically all three of those places, and I understand the depth of the problem super, super in detail, especially being a PM, because it's like all about like understanding the workflow of your entire team. And I also have like a lot of underlying knowledge of compilers, which are like the base technology here. And
Where'd that come from?
I actually studied computer engineering in college.
At RIT?
Yeah, I went to RIT, upstate New York. And in that, you take a lot of like base level system design stuff.
Right.
And I also just like data. And when I started playing with a lot of like React compiler, Babel stuff, there's AST Explorer. I used to just like nerd out and go into detail of that. So I realized I was pretty well set to solve this problem, and it's something I really cared about from my days as a PM. And I was like, shoot, this is something broken I would have killed for something like this as a PM.
So do you think that your natural skill set happened to be the right skills to solve the problem, or is it more kind of like you just got really good at using the AST Explorer, you know what I mean, and just sort of like turned that like butter knife into a screwdriver at some point?
It's more of the latter.
Okay.
I should get close to the mic. Yeah, it's definitely more of the latter. I actually think that being a founder, you pick up the skills that you need.
Yeah.
Just out of like rote determination. But I had not touched compiler stuff since college for many years. And then as soon as I started going into the details of how to do the implementations on this type of stuff, I was like, oh shoot, I know some of this. And now I'm like 10 times better at it, like many orders of magnitude better. And that happened through the determination of having a project that I really wanted to make work and then going as deep as possible into the technology.
Right.
Yeah.
What happens when every startup in the world starts off with a great design system?
That's a really good question. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. It's going to be the utopian world with flying cars. And
Yeah,
everything.
right.
Unlocking GMV.
Yeah, unlocking GMV, unlocking business value, unlocking the world. No, I mean, honestly, I've been at early stage startups for quite a while and quite a portion of my career. And one time we had an incredible designer named James, and he did a lot of design systems work, and I would sit next to him for multiple hours a day and do design iteration with him. Having the system made us like 10 times faster. And then when I worked with designers that didn't use systems, I don't know how, it was like the biggest pain in the ass ever. Like it just didn't really work in a way that functioned to make us successful at a company, make all of our stuff consistent, and make us move quickly. And if an early stage startup didn't have to go through all the configurational steps to set up a design system, if they had something out of the box that they could style, skin, configure in a way that's unique to them, and then just go running with it, they would be able to move like an order of magnitude faster.
But isn't that also like what, you know, Material UI and some of these other systems promise?
They promise it, but they don't really deliver fully on it, right? Because it ends up being more of a headache to set up those systems and actually consistently use them than not to, right? If you look at like a lot of the traditional wisdom at startups and places like that, it's like, dude, fuck the design system, fuck everything, just ship, right? But having like consistent good design speeds up your engineering team, speeds up your design team.
Big time.
By a lot, right?
Yeah.
We can even get into math there if you want. Like, but not only does it do that, but it like also makes it so you could target different sets of customers, right? The traditional wisdom is that design doesn't matter at the very early stage, but it does to an extent. And having something a little bit more polished allows you to get in front of a different set of users a lot more quickly and a lot more consistently and understand those problems. And early on, your biggest signal is going to be talking to as many people as possible.
Right.
If good design can iterate you faster with more conversations, that's a massive unlock for people in stages that are like just at the start, right?
So when you're obviously you've talked to hundreds of designers, hundreds of founders. What are the types of things that they're saying to you that are important in that beginning journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Shipping speed is one big thing, and making sure that there's a source of truth is another one, right? Because really quickly things become out of sync, and then they just have a huge headache to deal with of like, how do I have all this shit on the code side that doesn't exist in Figma. I have all this shit in Figma that doesn't exist in code, and all of it doesn't look like one another, right? And then they get confused about who to ask to do the next set of things. And then in terms of super early stage, the most important thing is just shipping speed. So a lot of times they don't really use anything on the design side, but as soon as they start scaling at some level.
Is that the right thing to be doing at the super early stage, is not to use anything on the design side? Do you recommend people just like skip Figma and go straight into like writing Tailwind?
I think it really depends on the customer, right? Or and it depends on the individual, right?
What are the types of questions that you're asking to figure that out?
Yeah.
Like, okay, are you two technical founders building in like enterprise SaaS on a really technical tool? You probably don't need a designer, right? Like just use an out of the box design system, Shade CN, something like that, throw shit together and ship, right? If you're scaling, bring on a designer, make that scale and get something going, but you don't need an in-house designer. If your workflow exists that you don't understand Figma and you don't understand how design works, then probably don't want to bring someone in super early and complicate your cycles. However, if you're building in a way where you want a consistent source of truth, if you're iterating with a set of customers where you're consistently showing them and coming back to the design side and showing them and coming back to the design side, then hell yes, you want a designer. Or you want some practices on the design side that can be learned and followed by the founders, right? Because that also increases your iteration speed a lot.
Yeah, and what are those? How does a non-designer founder learn that set of practices that they can follow so that they don't have to drop that guap, shrink that runway?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, dude, there's actually a ton of like content online about how to design consistently.
What do you recommend?
So Figma University.
Oh, yeah?
Great. And then there's a ton of YouTube series on it. And I just brute forced it. Honestly, I just like went in there and started learning auto layout and just fucked around with all the buttons. And I figured it out eventually. But like, for example, there's some guys downstairs who are one of my customers actually. They initially would build things on the design side or on the dev side and just show them to customers over and over again. And I just kind of told them, I was like, dude, like, why even do the engineering on this right now? You're just showing mock-ups to people. So then I sent them a couple of videos from Figma University on how to use auto layout and how to use this. Now their like iteration speed is 10 times faster.
Wait, and are they using Ion Design?
Yes, but only when they've already showed it to the user like 4 or 5 times. Like, because they iterate like 5 times with just Figma mockups and doing the prototype mode, sending it to them. And then once they're ready, they just hit a couple of buttons. They have all the code.
Do you have a sense of, or did they have a sense of how much time that actually saved them?
Yeah, dude. I mean, like from the original dev cycles, they would take like 3 days, 4 days at least to just build something to show someone. That went down to like a couple hours.
It's almost like Ion is, and we promise this is not an ad.
Not an ad.
But it's almost like the software that you're building, it will replace prototyping in a way, because if it's as easy, prototyping is meant to save engineering spend. So if you can augment the engineering part of testing something, that's ostensibly getting rid of the prototyping phase, which is amazing.
It depends, right? So I'll say this, right? Ion is really good for generating your visual pieces and your UI UX components, right? But we don't do everything, right? Like we like make stub functions for like your buttons, your inputs, all that type of stuff, so the engineer can configure the business logic, because we don't guess business logic.
Right.
We don't do your architecture and we don't do your asynchronous data, right?
Right.
So those are kind of the harder parts and more engaging parts on the engineering side, and the rote work is the design side, right? So I wouldn't say it takes prototyping out of the question, because they shouldn't generate code for no reason, right? They should still just go and prototype with like their mockups. But as soon as they're ready, it'll just speed them up way faster so it makes the implementation barrier a lot less of a engineering spend, if that makes sense.
How are you understanding or getting clarity around what founders need first? We were talking about this a little bit earlier this morning.
What do you mean by what they need first?
Like you are going to be in a position, you already are, where you are prescribing certain components in a certain way with certain like motifs, or even just like a really, really reduced brand identity in a way.
Yep.
You know, like that is prescriptive. How do you decide what to prescribe first?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, it really just depends on the customer at the end of the day and the flows, right? Like, for example, one of my customers is a Latin American banking app, right? And dude, like the type of components that they build are inherently different than these other guys who are building chief of staff software. But
what are examples?
Like they're building payment cards and like loan information cards and stuff like that, which are all also getting generated by Ion. And then on the chief of staff side, it's like to-do lists and like bulleted stuff. But if you actually look at the atoms, it's fucking same. It's just they're built in slightly different ways, you know? And it's kind of like, okay, how do I make it as generic as possible to serve these folks and then give them a way to reskin everything in the right way, just with configuration settings, and allow them to go and ship really fast from there.
That makes a lot of sense. And so like in the Figma prototyping journey, like how much time do you think a non-designer team, or like a non-designer product team, maybe like the two technical founders, how much time would they need in Figma University to be able to like build serviceable prototypes that would be pretty good to convert into code, you know, when they've got the customer feedback on those iterations?
Good idea. Good question. Excuse me. Are they an engineer or no? So if they're
let's say they're like a engineer. That's like, you know, they're fine with React. They can get the job done.
Less than a day.
Less than a day.
Yeah, because I mean, auto layout and things like that in Figma map 1-to-1 with Flexbox, and if you know Flexbox, that's instant.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it takes like probably a couple hours to understand how to like reformat stuff and do it in that like modular way. It's not super difficult, I would say.
Do you think that like this whole hullabaloo about naming layers and stuff in Figma, does it correspond at all to having code ready Figma mocks, or is it just fine to?
It's fine.
Yeah.
From our perspective, it's fine because we're able to like do some magical shit on our side to like figure out how things should be split up properly. But what makes a big impact is if you make more modular components, which I'm a proponent of making everything as modular as possible anyway. So I'll, regardless of my product, I'll always say that's the way you should go. And whenever something can be pulled out, pull it out.
Yeah.
Right. But otherwise, it doesn't really matter that much.
And do you have any advice also on how to manage transitory states? Because I feel like this is one of the places where you might be able to get destination states to be consistent with each other between Figma and your code. But I feel like the place where so much design to code rot happens is the transitions. Either like,
like motion and animation, or
motion.
Actually,
motion and animation can be kind of gnarly, but like even like loading states, surprisingly. Right? Because it's like you can just like seize up the whole screen with like a spinner. But if you're talking about just like component by component loading, or like a shiny animation, whatever, it always feels like even with the really, really like well-resourced apps, even they seem to struggle to get it right sometimes.
Yeah.
There's no good libraries for it right now, honestly, is the thing. Because like, I mean, Framer Motion and stuff like that are pretty decent, but it's like, it's such a headache to actually like implement. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Both on the engineering side and on the design side.
Right.
And also on Figma, it's not really easy to do motion really well.
Yeah.
And then also transitionary states in general, it's most likely what you're saying is because it's supplementary to the flow. So it's generally like the last thing that the product manager prioritizes and the engineers prioritize, and the designers care a lot more about it than anyone else, I would say, actually. Interestingly enough. But yeah, there's a ton of rot that happens there. How to solve that? Trying to get as much of that built in as possible from the ground up is the best. Because, like, I mean, not plugging my product again, but if we could do a generation that will automatically be able to intuit what a loading state should look like and all these things without having to make it extra work for the engineer is pretty clear win, in my opinion, right? I wonder if those could be layered into the design system, too.
Yeah. Like, one question that was just coming to mind as you were talking about that is, where is that line where is that line between using an out of the box design system and then retrofitting it to match maybe your brand identity or your use cases? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? I mean, what does a brand identity really mean when it comes to design atoms, right?
I mean, I understand brand identity. Like if you were to look at a KFC bucket and then cover up, the general's face,
right,
you could see the 2 red streaks on the side and know that is KFC.
Yeah. Like actually, if we were stuck in a room and like the only way we could get out was to create a KFC branded login screen, right? Like, but like we couldn't use the KFC logo.
The new sequel to a Halloween movie.
Yeah. This is like Saw 7, right?
Saw 7. Design unlocked.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like we probably could.
Yeah.
Right, and people would recognize it.
Yeah. I mean, I think early on, really baking in a design identity is hard, right? Like incredibly hard, especially considering like the details of your application. Like they're not so fleshed out that you could really layer in identity pieces. And on top of that, it's not an expense that you want to spend.
Oh, totally. We talk to founders all the time that they drop like $20,000-$50,000 on literally, and they call it a design system. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, these are assets that are not transferable to the product. They just work for one instance, and that's the marketing site.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
What I do find, though, it's still a challenge. Even when they go through that buyer's remorse, the founders are still left with the same problem, which is we want to be able to move fast on a reliable design system, but when does change get introduced? When do we decide to build something from the ground up? When do we introduce something where it feels like our own, but still leaning on the fundamentals of that great design system? That is, I really do think, the hardest part. Like, do you have any thoughts on how to navigate that problem?
Yeah. So I think that there's clear benefits to a design system that are separate from brand, right? The clear benefits to a design system early on is it speeds you up. It keeps you consistent. And it makes like your entire interoperability flow a lot faster, right? And it's a clear cost saving thing, right? In the long run, right? Even though a lot of people will say that early on it's like a lot to adopt, I think that it's worth it a lot of the time, right? That is kind of decoupled from brand, but if you are consistent with a design system early on, you could layer in brand pretty quickly on top of it, I think. And you could not retrofit, but you could just say like, hey, how do we take these existing components that we have and modify them in a certain way and layer in brand identity on top of them so that like everything that we've already done is not moot effort and we don't have to do like a full like revamp of everything,
So do you think that it's better to conceive of the design system for an early stage startup as a piece of infrastructure?
Yes.
Or a brand?
Infrastructure. Early on, it's infrastructure, at least in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
Because like...
I think so too, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean... Also, this is my biased dev brain thinking, right? Like from a dev perspective, right? Like think about, it's like building with shade CN versus building with like primitives.
Right.
Like which one would you prefer? Like
easy.
Yeah, easy. And like what percentage increase is it? It's probably like a 50 to 100% increase.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like actually even more than that a lot of times, right? If you don't have to deal with all that stuff out the gate. And that across a full organization is a massive unlock, right? In brand, is separate, but they're very tightly coupled in the same piece of infrastructure. And brand can be layered in as you get to the point where you need that, right?
We're on the same page that a good design system is really more a piece of product infrastructure than it is a brand asset. Now, I have a question for you, Samraaj, and honestly for you too, Harrison. I think you two can really both speak to this quite well. I feel like it's very often the case that you'll come across a founder or a startup that maybe this is sort of like design is not their home field, right? And they feel like so many things, they have to get this right. And sometimes I get the feeling like they're paranoid about the wrong things.
Yes.
And I don't know how to make them paranoid about the right things, which is partly like letting design get out of the way rather than making sure that there's like a pop factor or like, oh, we got to make the design system sizzle.
That's it. So, I mean, a lot of founders that I meet, like especially folks who are doing it for the first time, become like super perfectionist about their first releases, and they want everything to be hella flashy, like friggin' colors everywhere, should blow it up like left to right. Like you submit your expense and it explodes or something.
Confetti cannon.
Yeah.
It's like, boom, you just expensed your coffee. Or just like, what's the most boring thing? Boom, you're SOC 2 compliant, right?
Yeah, or like fucking, we have to integrate a new WebGL library because of the 404 page.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no.
Right?
No.
So a lot of folks get really caught up in that and think that's what design means. In my opinion, design means how usable is this? How consistent is this? And how does it really speak to the mindset and mantra of the end user, right? Like, can the end user get what they need done and understand what is happening in the most consistent way possible? That is good design. Good design isn't explosions everywhere and like all this type of stuff. And anyone listening to this, I'm sure already knows this.
Right.
But for a lot of first-time founders, that's what they bias towards. Like, how do I make something super flashy? All this type of stuff.
How do you pierce through the insecurity though? Like, how do you that's what I feel like is so often where these concerns about it looking flashy, like that's where they're coming from, is they feel like somehow like it's
nobody's going to use this unless
or like it's inadequate for some reason, right? To have just like a very minimalist design that kind of gets out of the way.
Yeah, that, I mean, a lot of people will say that's boring, or like this is, this is what everyone else does. I want to be different.
Right.
Classic.
The way exactly, right? But
Hamburger menu, it must be right. Everyone does it. It's like, well, nope.
no, we're doing
so many things that
something
are wrong.
else.
Well, that's kind of the opposite of like the hamburger menu is your favorite anti-pattern or anti-convention, but like you're talking also about like people who are like, listen, we gotta totally innovate on
Everything,
the login screen.
right.
Yeah.
The way that, okay, I mean, this is my personal opinion, right? I mean, there's a couple of things here that we can unpack, right? Really beautiful design, I think, is a privilege to be earned. And that's how I treat it for me personally.
Love that. Can you expand off of that?
Yeah, it's like, dude, okay, once I prove this problem and make it so I'm actually getting revenue and getting to a point, fuck yeah, let's go and make this pretty as hell.
Yeah.
Right?
Perfect.
And then, like, for example, this is an example. For Ion, we first, like, I love visual stuff. I love beautiful things. Like, this is one of the reasons I'm working in design, right? But, like, I had the most shitty-ass logo ever, like, that I designed in 5 minutes. Like, the left half of the logo was completely inconsistent with the right half. It didn't. I had an SVG that didn't scale properly, like I would do, and this shit would break because I'm not a good designer. And after we hit a couple milestones in revenue, I was like, all right, cool. Let me spend $400.
Yeah.
I spent $400, right? And I earned it. And I told my co-founder, I was like, this is the most frivolous expense ever. We do not need this, but this makes it fun for me, right?
There is something to be said, I think, about like a certain level of confidence that comes along with a brand identity and a design system that you've earned the right to retrofit or maybe like expand on. Just going back to your question of like, you know, how do you see that? There are moments where it's pretty hard to understand. I think like your opinionation is probably one that I would subscribe to the most, which is earning that right when you hit PMF. But there are some times where it's just not necessary. And I always think about Craigslist. Craigslist built a like multi-billion-dollar business just off of like blue URLs.
Yeah.
And then what happens when you add design thinking to that same problem, like room rentals? You get Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's funny though because the intervention is not happening at the UI level there. I mean, sure it is in some sense, but it's not about like the way the buttons looked. It's just that they were like, okay, let's actually design think about the problem, you know?
Yeah.
And
versus just like the presentation of it.
Yeah.
I think it also comes down to what your core risk is. Or I like to think about things in terms of core risks, but I could also say it says like, what is the core piece that you're serving to end users, right?
Right.
Like for example, Gusto, I don't know.
Gusto, I think, yeah.
Their first hire was a designer.
Yeah.
Because their product, like one of the key deliverables was good design to the end user on HR when it was shitty.
David Nugent, if you're watching. Great
Oh,
work.
yeah.
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 Exactly. Right. And it's like they knew that their core benefit to end users was design.
Right.
So they were like, okay, so it would be dumb for us to not get a designer first. But I think a lot of people convince themselves that that's one of their core benefits when it's not right?
Yeah.
Like you just have to think about what is like the main risk here, right? Is your
Right.
thing going to be usable? Is that the risk, or is the risk that it actually works in these ways?
So yeah, what do you have like thoughts or opinions around when a founder is maybe in a space? I think maybe this is like all contextual, but when a founder's in a space that traditionally design has not touched, let's say like fintech, you know, like more specifically like maybe the mortgage industry.
Yeah.
Hypothetical.
Yeah, hypothetical. We didn't used to just work at like two mortgage banks. So what happens when design has not touched that industry and the founders really do believe that design is a differentiating factor, but you're also trying to weigh that truth up with the truth that we need to ship fast, we need to get it out the door, we need to talk to more users, like engage on the more hairy side of design, which is just like research.
Well, I mean, it really comes down to like what the customers are asking for, right? Like just look at Rippling, Gusto, Robinhood, all these type of things, right? Their entire sell was to make things much more usable for everyone and decomplicate a mess, right? Like, and I'm sure that their key user complaints was like, I don't know how the fuck any of this works, right?
Right.
And their core sell was like, how do I make this more usable for the more average user rather than like a financial specialist? Right. Robinhood, I'm sure one of their early people was a designer, and they're killing it because their core thing is like, how do we bring like
Ludwig, if you're watching. Cool.
Ludwig too? Okay, awesome. You know everyone. But like, I am sure that like one of their core things, like their entire thesis is like, how do we take like the sophistication of like financial investors on Wall Street and bring those into like the home on your phone, right? And a lot of that problem is like really hard data problems of like what investments mean and how they're actually done, right? And they were able to simplify it and serve it to people. And the core risk there was, how do we make it so everyone understands these things, right?
But did that thinking come from, I mean, did their output as an MVP start, like did they go in, I'm trying to even figure out how to ask this question. It's like, did they go, like teams like Robinhood, they came right out the gate with a really sophisticated design language. Is that a result of design thinking or spending time on the actual outputs?
It's probably a function of talking to customers a ton.
Yeah.
I would imagine, right? I mean, like I always bias through talking to customers because YC, but like I would imagine that like their core thesis is probably that like, hey, we want to make it so that anyone can invest like a dude on Wall Street, right?
And how are companies supposed to decide when design is like a competitive advantage or not, and like whether or not to like invest in that? Because when I'm talking to founders, I actually anti-sell design. As a designer, I anti-sell it because
Makes sense too.
if you haven't hit like, you know, either 30% month over month growth or like net operating income, like really you should not be focused on junk around brand identity, animation, motion, stuff like that. Even a lot of basic design collateral, such as like a design system, you should borrow what has already been made. If they were in the same position as Robinhood when they were first getting started, what are the conversations? What are the questions that founders are asking themselves to find out if design is worth it from day one?
I mean, that's a really, really, really deep question, right? I would work backwards from where I think design matters the most and then try to apply that to the same problem, right? Like it's like, if you look at a consumer social website, design probably matters a shit ton there early on, right? If you're looking at like simplification of complicated workflows, design probably matters a shit ton there early on.
But isn't it all subjective? Like on Wall Street, everyone's using a PC, right, in Excel. And I think everyone at this table might agree that both of those products are not up to snuff in the design world, both the PC and Excel. But they love it. Like my Wall Street buddies, they adore it. They are like huge power users, but at the same time,
but those are the experts, right?
Yeah.
Those are the sophisticated experts who have been trained in that, right? Like if you're making something more approachable and accessible to like a mass of people where there's a training gap that needs to be bridged, design probably matters like a shit ton there. You know what I mean? Right? It's like, how do we, these guys that are doing these sophisticated trades in Excel and PCs, they are okay doing all this stuff because it's one, part of their profession, and two, there's best practices that they learn on those things, right? Whereas like an individual, in order to bring them up to the level that these folks are doing, you probably need to make it a lot more accessible.
So is it the case that like design will never touch that? Like I remember when, I mean, I don't remember if this was before my time, but the Bloomberg, I remember reading about how the Bloomberg terminal upended like all of Wall Street. It surfaced information in real time right at your fingertips, but it looks like ass, right? Like if you were to look at it, it looks like ass. And so the execution of it, the output of it in spirit was really well designed. It may not have like the best visual language or the best UX architecture, but the spirit of it came through. How did they, like, what do you think those questions were when deciding like, okay, like here's the status quo, this is how things are done. And if it's entrenched that, you know, that world is going to be maybe using like PC and Excel and like all these really, really non-designer first choice like products, how is it that, I guess what I'm just trying to understand is like, when does a founder understand when design differentiation matters?
I think that a lot of design differentiation stories are just so stories where they actually just had something that worked and then they retroactively put on this like fairy tale of how delight was the reason that it worked. But really what it was like just a piercing breakthrough, right? Like a step function change in the experience they're able to deliver. And that doesn't have to do with like gradients or like, or it has to do with design, but just like not at like a visual design or a visual communication design level. It's more like,
I guess it's the amount of, what I'm hearing from both of you is like, it's the amount of conviction in the eye of the beholder. If you are an expert in, let's say, fintech, and you're like, holy shit, like these experiences are terrible, or like you're a nurse in the hospital and like you're just looking at your custom made software and you're like, wow, this is terrible. You are looking at that as an opportunity to change the thing that you're experiencing. But at the end of the day, that is subjective. Like there's no,
that's right.
You know, and like I do think that you have to start off as an expert to apply that prescription.
Well, I also would go back to core risk here, right? Is the core risk here design, or is it coming to a new innovation on the like financial side of it, or on the nursing side, like workflow side of it, right? And then if design really matters that much, would people be like falling over to buy your thing based on just design uplifts? Or do you have to layer in a bunch of other stuff?
Well, and I think this is also where design is a bit of an overloaded term. It's carrying way too many different definitions on its shoulders. And so like there are types of design that are probably going to be essential for any endeavor to be a breakthrough success. Oftentimes ones that have to do with just like tailoring the product or tailoring like the offer to whatever it is the customer needs. Depending on, you know, what your job title is, you're probably doing the same thing, but you give it different names. So like a designer calls that UX research, and a founder calls that talking to customers.
Product manager calls it, customer discovery?
Yeah, customer discovery. Yeah, exactly. But they're all like kind of doing the same thing, which is just like talking to the people who have the problem.
And understanding it deeper.
Yeah, to update their own map of what that need is. And then they like figure out how to eliminate steps and form fields and model all the weird like peninsulas and crags and stuff of the problem in a more general sense that then makes it ready for mobile. So now you've modeled enough of the stock market game that you can start like offering complex financial derivatives on mobile, which is pretty wild, right? Like, and that's a design problem, but I don't think it's a UI design problem as much as it is like
the design thinking that went into
how
to serve it. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think why is it you think, like, question for both of y'all, why is it that you think that designers oftentimes get that confused? Is it because they're just it's misguided passion, or is it an aptitude, or is it like,
I think it's an industry-wide thing, actually.
Yeah,
because like the end user will see the conglomeration of all of these things and see it as the UX.
Oh, totally.
You see what I mean? Because the end product of all of those things is a UX.
Yeah.
So they're going to be like design. Right. And then that backward function goes into the industry because all of that goes towards the output. Like the net output is still like, what are you seeing? right?
Yeah. And I think like a lot of like Steve Jobs cosplay kind of this is how it manifests, right? It's like, I just really care a lot. And it's got to be perfect. And
Meanwhile,
it's like,
doesn't talk to a single customer.
yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, doesn't talk to a single customer,
Yeah.
right? And I think that like that perfectionism is like, it's probably true that the people who care the most about the problem are the ones who care most about the customer.
Yep.
But then that comes with it a whole basket of behaviors that are correlated with that customer care and that proximity. But like, you know, you obsessing over like what the loading screen animation looks like, dude, nobody gives a fuck.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
real
and
talk.
also, just to that point, like, I do think that, ironically enough, I'm using the word think, but like companies that have like a good design understanding of where to appropriate the discipline
Yeah.
are beginning sentences internally with "it should be because," and then they're pointing to like customer testimonials, the KPI that they got to weigh up against the user experience,
Yeah.
data, and industry insight. Whereas I think like greener founders, actually I know greener founders definitely are starting off sentences with "I think," and then it's just like subjectivity.
Well,
Yeah.
let me give an example
Yeah.
of that actually
Yeah.
for a quick second. So as we speak right now, I think actually it happened this morning. A founder that I talked to yesterday had his YC interview. So let's pray it's a phone call, not an email, guys. But like he was doing a thing with like a web scraping, right? AI enabled web scraping. And check this out, right? Like you would think talking in terms of core risks, right? I'm thinking to myself, like during the interview that we had, like we did a mock interview together yesterday.
I gave him a mock interview as well.
Okay, great. Yeah. And so,
I did not.
but like, we were like, okay, I thought to myself, this is an undifferentiated space. What makes this different? And the answer he gave felt very much like, oh, design is going to be our core edge, but like for developers of like, oh, like with AI, it's such a different experience and it's so much easier to use, whatever. And then I asked him later, like, well, who are the incumbents that have actually like, are there any incumbents that have gotten big in the web scraping space? I've never really looked that closely.
Me neither.
Yeah, he says that there's like 2 companies that as of 2021, their combined annual revenues were like north of 600 million.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
But then I was like, well, how did they get that big? Was it through like a more delightful experience? He was like, no, it was IP address rotation and just being better at like not getting blocked by the various like proxy guards.
The classic arms race of dev security,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
And
Yeah.
now check that out though. That's the core risk.
Yes.
The core risk is not the delightful experience. The core risk is just like, do you have forklifts that can swap out IP addresses and like server racks or like route shit to like a different data center?
Or
right?
some innovation that makes it so you don't have to do it nearly in the same way as them.
Right, but that's like really just a breakthrough on the core risk. And then you start wondering, like the next step is like, okay, well, could you describe that as a design problem? Like you kind of could in terms of where to appropriate the design thinking is like it turns out that the thing the customer cares about more than anything else is not getting blocked when they have to scrape like 50,000 pages.
There's like, there's like approachability in terms of the UI making the value of the product approachable.
Right.
And then, but the harder, deeper part that maybe founding teams don't get right is what comes before all that.
Mm-hmm.
The meat, the bones is coming in the form of looking at data, talking to customers. Like that's really where design is. And I often say to our designers, Figma, I love that tool. It's amazing, but it is just an implementation detail.
Totally.
Yes.
Before you, like, they should be spending the least amount of time in Figma. The most amount of time should be spent designing, you know, not pixel pushing, but talking to customers, doing all that stuff that I was listing before. Where do you think founders could get more guidance, or like what guiding principle could they hold on to that would address those really critical moments where they're wavering between the two? Or his UI is super attractive. It's a super fun thing to like work on, brand identity, all
It's
that
super
stuff.
fun, yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
but it's a ruse.
Wait, I gotta interject on this. I gotta tell you, like, cause you gotta get in on this inside joke, and all y'all gotta get in on this inside joke too. So, Harrison posted a bunch of videos and like shout outs and stuff on a popular product launch website. I'll leave it to the reader to guess which one.
We may or may not have seen the person yesterday.
We may or may not. It's
Product Hunt.
It's Product Hunt. and some people took him up on the like offer to like get on a call, to get his feedback. And this one guy was like, Harrison was just like basically describing, maybe you should do like a painted door test, just like sort of put a button on your website, put like a Google Analytics tracker on it, see how many times it gets clicked, but don't have it lead anywhere. Just if there's any interest in the thing that button does, then you can go and build it. And the guy like talked like as if Harrison was pitching him on a conspiracy and was like, so you think it should be a ruse?
No, it's just a test.
No. He's like almost like, so what's the angle to this long con? Like, it's like
hilarious.
Yeah.
I'm like, end recording. Don't want anyone thinking that I'm trying to confuse. It's just like,
just a painted door test, dog.
test
Like,
test
hilarious.
the value, test the message, and like don't waste days, weeks, whatever, engineering something that may have been built off a hunch.
Wait, so what's the ruse though? What was the thing you were saying was a ruse?
Oh, well, the thing about it is like the shiny parts of design
Or ruse.
they trap founders.
Yeah.
And they suck them in. And what actually really sucks about it is when that ends up happening, the discipline actually gets reduced because those founders that started off as design curious are now design sensitive in a negative way. Because they're design actually did not help me early on.
Totally.
I actually focused on all this UI stuff, all this brand identity stuff, and I tried to transfer it to my product, and I tried to make it more approachable, and nothing worked. Design is like I'm going back to my old way of thinking, when in actuality, the design is the meaty part of design is all those are all those things around like talking to your customers, knowing exactly what they're going to say to the point where you're now done with that research.
Yep, that's right. And also like the flashy parts allow us to like ignore our inner like insecurities about just like shipping shit all the time that sucks, right? I think that's the inherent thing with founders.
It's an escape.
It is, right?
It's an escape.
It's not only an
Totally
escape
is.
from that insecurity, but it's like an excuse to delay yourself without like having to like just really just get your really shitty thing out there and get the real signal, right?
It's quite selfish, actually.
Yep. It is, but it's a trap that I think everyone has fallen into at some point in their life. I mean, I'm definitely guilty of it.
Oh, for sure.
How do you find yourself avoiding that trap? I mean, you know it better than anyone.
Yeah. Well, the thing is like, how shitty can I make this, and then take pride in that, right? Like, I want to look back at my previous product and show it to everyone. Like, I come up with a story, like, okay, I have a press release at some point in some distant future, and be like, this is my first version. Check it out. Just like look at Airbnb, look at Craigslist, look at all these, look at Stripe, right?
And what's nice is it's a nice litmus test, because the customers that adopt those blue URLs first, those are your first customers.
Fire. Yeah,
those are your first customers, and the customers that are not willing to engage in that product, they're your customers next year.
Yeah, exactly. It's not as burning, right?
Yeah.
But I'd also say that this is also very decoupled from design system thinking.
Yeah.
Right. Because like flashiness, UI, UX, that type of stuff is very decoupled from speeding yourself up on like a basic unit economics thing on your engineering team and your design team. I think that those are inherently different, and they're coupled like we were talking about for some reason.
I think that prompt is a really interesting one, Harrison, that, like it forced me to answer the question again for myself of how do you balance that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you thread that? And what stands out, honestly, is I actually do think it's possible. It totally is possible to be a little too aggro in a premature rollout. And it's so weird because, like, on one hand, you don't want to stay in forever beta and, have this idea that just like is slowly decaying on the shelf. On the other hand, dude, we've been talking about like some examples of some, startups that they scaled super aggressively something that fundamentally did not deliver the value. And then they locked themselves into a certain set of path dependencies that a team and operating processes and playbooks got built on something that baseline does not work.
Interesting. Wait, so basically you're saying that they're not solving a core problem. and then they built the rest of their business and they jumped forward without having like PMF.
Or they found a problem that is core, but
The solution did not solve that problem.
the solution did not.
I see.
Yeah. They picked sort of the wrong corner of the pentagon of the radar graph, and they built this thing that now scaled it up, and now they have like a reputation out in the market as the wrong solution to the problem, and that's really hard to unfurl, right? And so, like, answering your question, I feel like the thing that feels the most natural is when you're ready to launch, when you have something that people can try out, and you should launch it at the scale where it feels like you're spending your reputational dollars like one bill at a time, right? In the sense that you're like, okay, I know that there's a risk this customer is going to try me and be unhappy.
Yeah.
But like, I do not want that risk multiplied by like 100. But you should probably take it multiplied by like 5.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, I feel like that's the balance to strike. And I mean, this was like a thing that we talked about this summer with like, when were we ready to launch the YC community?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. How do we know that we're ready?
Yeah.
And, you know, for us, we were saying to ourselves, like, it's not, at first we were like, well, treat our site as the first portfolio piece. But really what was going on was that was escapism.
Totally.
It's not. It's how we think about design for startups.
Right.
Like what are our beliefs that drive us?
And what do you guys think people should do if they're like, okay, I really don't feel like I'm ready to launch? How can they get customer feedback or get products in customers' hands?
Consult.
I think it's also just like, how embarrassed are you okay being?
Yeah.
You know, like you should, if you're not embarrassed about the things that you're shipping, are you a founder? Because you should be embarrassed. You should be really, really embarrassed every single day about
You should
the
feel
things
bad
that you
about yourself.
You should get out of here. Get the fuck out of here.
No, I think that's one thing. And the other thing is also just consult, right? Because like a business at the end of the day is like solving a problem, right? And it is going through whatever means necessary to solve that problem possible, right? And I would say that like the solution for that problem is what the business serves, but that solution is agnostic to what the actual problem is, right? Like your business, my business exists, for example, like Ion exists to simplify the workflow between product teams and make it so they could ship faster, more consistently, and cleaner.
Right.
How do I solve that? Well, first things I did was I just started consulting, right? I just started implementing this shit for people like directly, and then automated myself a ton, and then I got there, right?
Yeah.
Like the very first iteration of my product was just me in my basement locked in there just writing code, right? And then slowly, iteration after iteration, it's gotten more and more automated, and then the solution becomes better, and then you see how people use it, and the solution becomes better and better, right?
You are the design.
Yes, I am the engineering at some point, right? I am the product, right? And then you just kind of go from there, right? And I think a lot of people, what they need to understand how to do is just like really fucking hard work, and you're just gonna have to consult essentially at first, and it's gonna feel like a consultancy at first, and then you're gonna automate the hell out of a lot of it.
Yeah. And it's actually so funny because I feel like a lot of people will see what you're doing and just like totally not understand.
Yeah. So you're telling me you're doing engineering work for a couple $100 that you would be making X amount elsewhere, you know?
Hard pass. Yeah. I actually have a stop in 3 minutes. Like,
yeah, exactly. But I think, I mean, YC's videos on this are really good. And early on, it feels very counterintuitive. It feels like consulting for not consulting money.
Right.
But as soon as you start tying money to the hours spent on like building out this type of stuff, it stops working in that same way.
Right.
I think the way to go about it is just like, how do I use this as a way to close my iteration loop with customer feedback as much as possible? Because like that is the core thing that you're chasing at an early stage company is like, how do I get feedback and customer insight recurringly, right?
Totally.
And you got to fight for anything to get that. And if early on I got to just hop into everyone's code base and just be an engineer, fuck yeah, I'm going to do it, right? Thankfully, I don't do that anymore for everyone.
Right.
But for some customers, I still do. I'll just hop in there and help them out with everything, right? So,
Like, what was your decision making process when you were trying to figure out, okay, like client 1, client 2, client 3 all got Samraaj's time in their code base. Now maybe like press fast forward into the future. When did they not get your time?
When I know that I can consistently train them to do what I'm doing, you know, like, cause there are like still training gaps that have to be filled for Ion to work properly. And there's also probably still a lot of markers in a lot of code bases that we don't understand yet. Right. And now I know that there's a specific subset of customers where it's basically all automated, where I could hop in for a little bit and then teach them and then remove myself from the equation.
Right.
Right. And when I know that I could consistently do that and just provide support, I will do it. Otherwise, I'm going to hop in there and understand every fucking little nitty gritty piece of your code base and figure out how I can automate that. You know?
Wow. Yeah. So, okay, like wrapping this up, what would you say is the one piece of advice that you want every non-designer founder to internalize about how to use design systems and design thinking at their startup?
Design thinking starts from the customer, right? So it all starts from how do I understand what the customer's problem is and come up with the most direct solution to it. Design thinking isn't like, what do these buttons look like? What do all these type of things look like? It's like, how do I make my solution actually work for the customer and make it as easy as possible for them to use it and see value, right?
Getting to know faster.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? And that's what design thinking is. So just go read the mom test. That's number one.
Okay.
I think I've mentioned the mom test every single time I'm in this room, by the way, but I love it. I love that book, actually.
Why don't you explain what the mom test is?
It's how do I talk to users in a way that's not, I need to talk to you about my business idea. It's just talking to users in a way where you're just jamming and understand their problems a little bit deeper and getting out their biases of talking to you as a founder and getting to the real nitty gritty of if they actually are giving you real stuff, not lies.
Totally. Yeah. We're always telling founders, like, they're like, what do we start? What's our feature set? Like, what do we start off with? Go to your competitors, scroll down to the testimonials, reverse image search their faces.
Smart man.
Go talk to them and ask them these 3 questions. What do you not like about this product or experience, the competitor? If you had a magic wand, what would you change? Is there anything in X competitor that you were expecting that you didn't see? Whatever their answer is, that's your wedge into the market.
That's
Totally.
fucking
Just
fire.
focus on those things.
Yeah.
That's fire. That's really fire, actually. I absolutely love that.
When you start talking to customers about their pain, that's when you're going to get real answers.
Yep.
Everything else is more or less just like fluff, and they might be just appeasing you. How do you prevent that?
Get them to pay. I would say follow the money, right? Like, one of the ways that I got to Ion, I mean, this is like really business schooly, but I'm not a business dude in that type of way, but it's just like a realization that in terms of line item expenses, engineers are insanely expensive, right? They're probably the most expensive line item in any tech business, right? And it's like, okay, if I'm following the money and they're spending X amount of time doing this, that is without having to talk directly to a user. They're showing with their money of what they're spending their business on. That, like, this is the thing I fucking care about.
Yeah.
Right? And then it's like, okay, that's the important person. Let me go and talk to these guys. Guess what? I'm already an engineer. I know a shit ton of them.
Right.
And then I could just get into deeper of like, okay, what is the worst part of the job? And thankfully for me, it was just like, yo, I've done this. And every time I had to do a design implementation, it's just like, fuck. Like, gotta get my 3 coffees, caffeinate the shit out of myself, and then lock myself in the basement and just like turn off my brain while I just do a bunch of CSS.
Right. Yeah. Well, do you have any other parting thoughts or anything else that you want to share?
I don't know. Maybe we should talk about this that we got going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this was Samraaj's idea that, like, you know, we do like a little collaborative doodle over the course of the episode, which we can do because we're all in the same room. Right.
Yeah, well, I suck at design or drawing especially, but these guys are incredible. And this is pretty awesome.
You can't tell who's who. And I don't know even which camera this is going to be pointed at. Like, so I don't know. We'll figure out a way to share it. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. Okay. There you go.
I think
Collab.
There you go.
Incredible.
Yeah, you know what you should do is you should do this every episode, and then you should put the person's name underneath and frame it.
Why don't you sign it?
There we go. I mean, I barely did anything here, but I will sign it anyway.
Lies.
Okay, amazing. Well, guys, that's all for this episode, and we will see you again soon. Thanks so much, Samraaj.
See ya.
Peace.
Bye.